You really should give up the profession entirely, as a matter of principle.
He was a legend of the small screen, a man whose presence commanded every frame. Richard Boone wasn't just another Hollywood star. He was television's ultimate gunslinger, a force of nature who brought depth and grit to every role. But behind the tough exterior, behind the sharp wit and steely gaze, was a man fighting battles no audience could see. At his peak, he redefined the Western hero, turning Paladin into one of TV's most unforgettable figures. He had it all: fame, power, creative control. Yet, beneath the surface, his demons lurked. A war-hardened veteran, a relentless perfectionist, a man tormented by the limits of the industry he helped shape. Alcohol took its toll. Hollywood turned its back. And when the fight for control became too much, he vanished, escaping to the shores of Hawaii, searching for something he never truly found. This is the untold story of Richard Boone, the rise, the fall, and the dark truth behind television's greatest gunslinger. Richard Boone's story didn't begin in the rugged landscapes of the Wild West or the bright lights of Hollywood. It started in Los Angeles, 1917, in a world of privilege and expectation. Born into a wealthy family, his father was a powerful corporate attorney, a man of discipline and structure, while his mother, a singer with Russian Jewish heritage, carried an artistic spirit that would shape him in ways he didn't yet understand. Boone's home was a collision of two worlds, one of order and ambition, the other of creativity and expression. As a boy, Boone was restless. He had the intelligence to excel in school and the physicality to dominate on the football field, but something inside him was never satisfied. He thrived in competition, played practical jokes, and often found himself testing boundaries. When his family moved to Glendale, he attended Hoover High School, where he built a reputation as a tough but sharp-witted athlete. Football gave him discipline. Literature gave him curiosity, but nothing quite seemed to fulfill him. He enrolled at Stanford University, one of the most prestigious institutions in the country. But higher education felt more like a cage than an opportunity. Boone wasn't the type to sit in lecture halls and wait for life to happen. He wanted action, something real. By 1937, he had enough. He walked away from Stanford, abandoning the path his family had laid out for him, and instead threw himself into a series of physically demanding, hands-on jobs. For a time, he worked as an oil rigger, enduring grueling shifts that tested his endurance and toughness. He dabbled in painting, explored writing, and even stepped into the boxing ring, facing opponents head-on with the same fearlessness that would later define his screen presence. He was searching, testing himself against the world, trying to find something that felt meaningful, but nothing prepared him for what came next. In 1941, with World War II engulfing the world, Boone enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He didn't seek out comfort or safety. He took on one of the most dangerous roles available, serving as a tail gunner on TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. His job was simple but deadly. Man the turret, fire on enemy aircraft, and survive missions that too often ended in disaster. Stationed in the Pacific Theater, he spent years flying into combat zones, facing relentless attacks from enemy fighters. The work was grueling, the risks unimaginable. He saw men beside him shot down, planes that never returned, and moments that left deep scars, ones that wouldn't fade even after the war ended. Boone carried those memories with him for the rest of his life, though he rarely spoke about them. The war hardened him, shaped him, and, in many ways, haunted him. When the fighting was over, like so many other veterans, Boone was left asking, what now? The world had changed, and so had he. He couldn't return to the life he had before. He had seen too much, felt too much. But then, an opportunity presented itself. The GI Bill gave returning soldiers access to education, a fresh start, a way to reinvent themselves. And for Boone, it led to an unexpected path: acting. At first, it was just an experiment, an attempt to channel his intensity into something creative. But as he stepped onto the stage for the first time, something clicked. Acting wasn't just about performance. It was about transformation, about stepping into the skin of another person, about telling stories that mattered. And for a man who had spent years fighting to survive, that was something he could believe in. Boone packed his bags and headed east, enrolling at the legendary Actors Studio in New York City. There, he trained under Sanford Meisner, a man who preached that acting wasn't about memorizing lines. It was about reacting, about feeling, about making every moment real. Boone threw himself into the craft, shaping a methodical, commanding presence that would make him unforgettable. From the brutal lessons of war to the disciplined world of the stage, Boone had finally found something worth fighting for. And with that, his transformation began. The restless, battle-hardened veteran was about to become one of Hollywood's most unforgettable figures. For Richard Boone, the war was over, but his life was just beginning. With the help of the GI Bill, he found himself on a new path, one he never expected: acting. He wasn't just another hopeful searching for fame. He was a man shaped by discipline, hardship, and the weight of real-life experience. That depth would set him apart. He enrolled at the legendary Actors Studio in New York City, training under Sanford Meisner, one of the most respected acting coaches of his time. Meisner didn't believe in forced performances. He taught actors to live in the moment, to react with raw emotion, to make every scene feel real. Boone absorbed it all, his presence growing sharper, his performances more natural. But acting wasn't just about voice and expression. Boone also studied movement with Martha Graham, a pioneer of modern dance. Through her, he learned how to use his body as a storytelling tool, making every motion deliberate, every stance meaningful. By 1947, Boone was ready to step onto the stage. His first big break came in Medea, a revival of the classic Greek tragedy, starring the legendary Judith Anderson. Boone's role was small, but sharing the stage with some of the greatest theatrical talents in the world was an education no classroom could offer. The production was a hit, running for over 200 performances, and Boone took it all in, learning from every scene, every moment. The stage became his proving ground. In 1948, he took on Macbeth, one of Shakespeare's most demanding plays. Shakespeare was a test for any actor, requiring precision, presence, and an ability to command language with authority. Boone handled it with ease, proving he could stand alongside seasoned stage veterans. Then, in 1950, he landed a role in The Man, a thought-provoking Broadway drama directed by Martin Ritt. The play explored deep themes of morality and human conflict, subjects that Boone would return to again and again throughout his career. With each performance, his reputation grew. He wasn't just another actor. He was something different, something more. His deep voice carried weight, his physicality brought presence, and his piercing gaze made it impossible to look away. It was only a matter of time before Hollywood came calling. That call came in 1950, when 20th Century Fox offered Boone a 7-year contract. Broadway had sharpened his skills, but Hollywood was about to make him a star. His first major role came in Halls of Montezuma, 1951, a war film directed by the legendary Louis Milestone. The movie, a tribute to the U.S. Marine Corps, was more than just a war story. It was a chance for Boone to tap into his own experiences from the battlefield. He played Lieutenant Colonel Gilfillan, a Marine officer trying to lead his men through the horrors of combat. Boone's performance stood out, his intensity making every word, every glance, feel real. Hollywood took notice. Over the next few years, he took on increasingly complex roles, proving he could play more than just the tough military type. In 1953, he starred in The Robe, the first film ever released in the groundbreaking CinemaScope format. He played Pontius Pilate, a man weighed down by the moral consequences of his actions. Instead of portraying him as a heartless villain, Boone gave Pilate depth, a conflicted figure burdened by regret. It was a small role, but one that left a lasting impression. That same year, he took a sharp turn in Vicky, 1953, a dark, psychological thriller. Playing Lieutenant Ed Cornell, a detective investigating a model's murder, Boone brought an unsettling edge to the role. But Cornell wasn't just solving a case. He was obsessed, unhinged, and dangerous. Boone made sure the audience felt the weight of that obsession, delivering a performance that was equal parts terrifying and mesmerizing. In just a few short years, Boone had established himself as a powerhouse performer, an actor who could bring complexity and depth to any role. He wasn't interested in playing simple heroes or one-note villains. He wanted characters with layers, men struggling with their own morality. But while Hollywood was giving him bigger roles, it wasn't giving him full creative control. Boone wasn't the type to just follow orders. He wanted more. He wanted to push boundaries. And that opportunity would come, not in film, but in television. His next role would change everything. Medic wasn't just another TV show. It was a revolutionary step forward for medical dramas. And Richard Boone was about to take television to a place it had never gone before. By the early 1950s, television was still finding its identity. Most shows were safe, predictable, designed to entertain rather than challenge. But Richard Boone wasn't interested in playing it safe. He wanted something real, something with weight, something that mattered. And in 1954, he found it. Medic was unlike anything that had come before. At a time when most medical dramas were lighthearted and sanitized, Medic refused to look away from the harsh realities of life and death. Boone took on the role of doctor, Conrad Steiner, a dedicated physician navigating the emotional and ethical complexities of medicine. But he wasn't just the star. He was the voice that guided the audience, introducing each episode with a somber, reflective narration that set the tone for what was to come. This wasn't just entertainment. Medic was as close to real medicine as television had ever dared to go. The show worked closely with doctors, shooting scenes inside real hospitals, ensuring that every procedure, every diagnosis was medically accurate. It tackled subjects that other shows wouldn't touch: mental illness, infertility, and even the devastating effects of atomic bomb radiation. One episode, Flash of Darkness, depicted the aftermath of an atomic explosion, a terrifyingly realistic portrayal of Cold War fears. Another episode followed the struggles of a pregnant woman diagnosed with leukemia, forcing the audience to confront a heartbreaking ethical dilemma. Boone thrived in this kind of storytelling. He wasn't just playing a doctor, he was embodying a man burdened by the weight of life and death decisions. A man who knew that not every story had a happy ending. His performance was understated but powerful, a perfect match for the show's raw, documentary-style realism. Critics praised the series, calling it groundbreaking, courageous, and ahead of its time. But not everyone was ready for Medic's honesty. NBC, like most networks, was still afraid of controversy. Boone constantly found himself fighting behind the scenes to keep the show as realistic as possible. But executives weren't always on his side. One of the biggest battles came over an episode featuring a cesarean section birth. It was a medically accurate depiction, a scene designed to educate and inform. But NBC deemed it too graphic, too controversial, and pulled it before it could air. Boone was furious. He believed in television's potential to tell meaningful stories, to tackle difficult subjects. But time and time again, the network's fear of backlash got in the way. Despite the challenges, Medic remained critically acclaimed, but its ratings couldn't compete with lighter, more digestible programming. The show was scheduled against I Love Lucy, one of the most popular sitcoms in television history. Audiences wanted laughter, not medical realism. After 2 seasons, Medic was canceled. For Boone, this was more than just the end of a show. It was another confirmation of what he had suspected all along. Television, as an industry, wasn't built for artists. It was built for advertisers, executives, and playing it safe. Boone had dedicated himself to something he believed in, and in the end, it wasn't enough. He wasn't the type to sit back and accept defeat. He wanted more control, more creative influence. He wanted to work on something where he could call the shots, where he wouldn't have to compromise. And in 1957, that opportunity arrived. The Western genre was about to be transformed, and Richard Boone was about to become the most unforgettable gunslinger television had ever seen. By the late 1950s, television was flooded with Westerns. Cowboys, shootouts, and frontier justice filled the airwaves, but few shows truly stood out. That changed in 1957 when Richard Boone stepped into the role of Paladin in Have Gun, Will Travel. This wasn't just another gunslinger, this was a different kind of Western hero. Paladin wasn't a rugged outlaw or a simple lawman. He was cultured, educated, and strategic. He lived in luxury at San Francisco's Hotel Carlton, dressed in tailored suits, quoted poetry, and sipped fine wine. But when duty called, he transformed, donning his signature black outfit, mounting his horse, and riding out into the wilderness to dispense justice. His business card was simple yet striking. A black background, a white knight chess piece, and the words, "Have gun, will travel." What made Paladin unique was his code of honor. He was a hired gun, but money was never his true motivation. While he charged wealthy clients $1,000 per job, he often worked for free when he believed in the cause. He used words before bullets, reason before violence. But when diplomacy failed, he was one of the fastest guns in the West. This moral complexity set Have Gun, Will Travel apart from other Westerns of the time. Audiences took notice. The show was an instant hit, running for 6 seasons and producing 225 episodes. It consistently ranked in the top 5 of the Nielsen ratings, proving that a Western could be both thrilling and intelligent. Boone's commanding presence and sharp delivery made Paladin an unforgettable character, a man of principle in a lawless world. But Boone wasn't just the star. He was shaping the show from behind the scenes. He directed 28 episodes, working closely with writers to deepen the show's themes and explore moral dilemmas rarely seen in television at the time. One of his key collaborators was a young writer named Gene Roddenberry, who would later go on to create Star Trek. Together, they pushed the boundaries of what a Western could be, infusing it with philosophy, social commentary, and psychological depth. Despite the show's massive success, Boone struggled with the demands of playing the same character year after year. He was a trained stage actor, a performer who thrived on variety, yet he was now locked into a single role. He compared returning to Paladin each season to drawing water from a deep well, a well that felt emptier with each passing year. He respected the show and took pride in its quality, but deep down, he wanted more. By the early 1960s, the frustration had set in. He had spent 6 years as Paladin, becoming a household name, yet he felt creatively stifled. The industry now saw him as only Paladin, limiting his opportunities to explore new characters. He longed for creative freedom, for something different, something that would challenge him as an artist. In 1963, at the height of the show's success, Boone made a bold decision. He walked away. He had built Have Gun, will travel into one of the most respected westerns of its time, but now he was ready to gamble on something new. His next project would be unlike anything television had seen before. It wouldn't be another western, another procedural, another formulaic production. Instead, it would be an anthology series, a show where Boone could play a different role every week, exploring a wide range of characters and stories. For the first time in his career, Richard Boone was in control. But Hollywood wasn't ready for what he had planned. After 6 years of playing Paladin, Richard Boone had everything a television star could want: fame, respect, and creative influence. But for Boone, that wasn't enough. He had spent too long trapped in the same role, and he was determined to break free from the constraints of formulaic television. He wanted something different, something daring. And in 1963, he took the biggest creative risk of his career. That year, Boone launched The Richard Boone Show, an ambitious anthology series unlike anything on television. Instead of telling the same kind of story every week with the same lead character, Boone envisioned a rotating repertory company, an ensemble of actors who would play different roles in a new drama each episode. One week, Boone might be a corrupt judge. The next, a desperate fugitive. It was the kind of artistic freedom he had craved for years. The show wasn't about routine, it was about reinvention. But while Boone had the passion, the industry wasn't built for experiments. Television executives wanted reliability, predictability, something they could sell to advertisers. An anthology series, one that changed characters and settings every week, was a gamble that made them nervous. From the very beginning, there were problems. The show's original story editor, the legendary Clifford Odets, passed away just as production was ramping up. Odets had been a towering figure in theater and film, and his influence was supposed to shape The Richard Boone Show into something truly groundbreaking. But with him gone, the creative vision wavered. His replacement struggled to maintain the same energy, and suddenly, the scripts didn't have the depth and sharpness Boone had envisioned. On top of that, NBC grew restless. Executives weren't sold on Boone's experimental approach. They wanted more action, more excitement, something easier to market. Boone, always a fighter, refused to compromise. He had walked away from Have Gun, will travel to escape formulaic television, and he wasn't about to let another network dictate his creative choices. Despite the challenges, the show had its strengths. The acting was top tier, the stories were intelligent, and critics appreciated Boone's boldness. In a rare move, the show even won a Golden Globe. But awards couldn't save it from the inevitable. The ratings weren't strong enough for NBC's liking, and the network decided to pull the plug. They didn't even bother telling Boone directly. He found out later. For a man who had fought so hard to create something meaningful, it was a crushing blow. He had put his reputation, his resources, and his heart into this series, only to see it discarded without a second thought. This was more than just another cancellation. It was a confirmation of everything Boone hated about Hollywood. The industry wasn't built for artistry. It was built for business. He had given television one of its greatest westerns. He had proven that TV could be intelligent, thoughtful, and layered. And yet, the moment he tried to push beyond the status quo, the industry turned its back on him. Boone was done. He had spent years fighting, but he was tired of battling executives who only cared about ratings and advertisers. He wanted out, so he did what few Hollywood stars would ever dream of doing. He walked away. He left behind the studios, the networks, and the politics of the industry. He packed his bags and set off for Hawaii, a place far removed from the Hollywood machine. For Boone, it wasn't just an escape. It was a last attempt at freedom. Richard Boone had always been a fighter, but by 1964, he was tired of the battle. Hollywood had taken its toll. The endless interference, the network politics, the industry's refusal to embrace real creativity. So he made a choice that few stars of his stature would dare. He walked away. He left behind the studios, the contracts, the expectations, and moved to Hawaii, a place that had always held a special meaning for him since his time in the Navy. He saw potential in the islands, not just as an escape, but as a new frontier for filmmaking. He worked behind the scenes to bring more productions to Hawaii, even convincing Leonard Freeman to film Hawaii 5-0 entirely on location, rather than splitting production with California. But Boone wanted more than just a supporting role in someone else's vision. He wanted to build something of his own. In 1968, he starred in Kona Coast, a pilot film meant to launch his own Hawaii-based television series. The show was meant to be his next great project, a fresh start away from Hollywood's suffocating control. But CBS passed on the series, and Kona Coast never became more than a forgotten film. The failure marked a turning point. Boone had spent years fighting to carve out a space where he could create on his own terms. But time and again, Hollywood refused to meet him halfway. With each rejection, each disappointment, his frustrations deepened. And with them, his drinking worsened. Alcohol had always been a part of Boone's life, but now it began to consume him. What may have started as a way to take the edge off became something he could no longer control. His reputation as a brilliant but difficult actor grew. His once commanding presence became unpredictable. His career, once unstoppable, started to slow. By the 1970s, the opportunities weren't what they used to be. He still took roles where he could, but the projects were smaller, the budgets lower. His drinking made it even harder. On the set of God's Gun, 1976, Boone walked off before finishing his lines. The studio had to bring in another actor to dub his voice, an unthinkable fate for a performer once known for his deep, commanding tone. But alcohol wasn't the only thing eating away at him. Boone had always been a heavy smoker, going through as many as 100 cigarettes a day. Years of tobacco and alcohol abuse took their toll, and his health began to decline. His once powerful frame grew weaker, his energy fading. Even when opportunity knocked, he let it pass. In 1973, he was offered a key role in The Sting, a major film starring Paul Newman and Robert Redford. The role of Doyle Lonnegan, the film's central antagonist, could have been the comeback he needed. But Boone turned it down. Some say he had already made enough money and didn't need it. Others believe his drinking had made it impossible for him to commit. Either way, the part went to Robert Shaw, and The Sting became one of the biggest films of the decade. Without him. As Hollywood moved on, Boone drifted further into isolation. By the late 1970s, he had left Hawaii and settled in St. Augustine, Florida, far from the industry that had once defined him. He stopped chasing roles, stopped fighting for creative control. The man who had once been one of television's biggest stars now lived quietly, far from the limelight. For Boone, there would be no grand comeback, no final return to Hollywood. The man who had spent his life fighting for his art had finally walked away for good. By the late 1970s, Richard Boone's fight was coming to an end. Years of heavy smoking and drinking had taken their toll, and doctors gave him the diagnosis he had feared: throat cancer. For most, this would have been a call to arms, a reason to fight. But Boone had spent a lifetime battling Hollywood, the networks, his own demons. Now he chose a different path. He refused treatment, accepting his fate with the same quiet resolve that had defined his best performances. He spent his final years in St. Augustine, Florida, far from the industry that had once made him a household name. There were no farewell tours, no grand public goodbyes. He had spent a lifetime resisting the trappings of celebrity, and in the end, he would leave on his own terms. On January 10, 1981, at the age of 63, Richard Boone passed away in the home where he had spent his last days in solitude. There was no Hollywood funeral, no spectacle, only a quiet departure, fitting for a man who had always lived by his own rules. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean, the same waters he had flown over during the war, the place where he had once sought refuge from Hollywood's suffocating grip. In the end, the ocean became his final escape. But though Boone was gone, his legacy endured. Have Gun, Will Travel remained one of the most unique and intelligent westerns ever created, a show that refused to follow the conventions of its time. Paladin wasn't just another gunfighter. He was a complex, deeply human figure, shaped by honor, intellect, and morality. Boone had helped redefine what a television hero could be, paving the way for more nuanced and layered storytelling in television. His influence stretched beyond the Western genre. His commitment to realism in Medic set the groundwork for medical dramas that would follow, inspiring shows that dared to tackle real-world issues with depth and honesty. The performances he gave, whether as a cultured gunslinger, a weary doctor, or a tormented detective, set a standard for television acting that still holds weight today. Richard Boone was never just an actor. He was a force, a man who refused to play by the industry's rules, who fought for the right to tell meaningful stories, who pushed back against the easy path in favor of something real. He was brilliant, stubborn, flawed, and unshakably independent. Hollywood may have moved on, but Boone's performances remain, frozen in time, each one a testament to his raw talent and unwavering dedication to his craft. His fight with the industry may have ended in frustration, but his impact is undeniable. Richard Boone never rode off into the sunset. He didn't need to. The legend of television's greatest gunslinger still lives on. Some legends fade quietly. Others carve their names into history, leaving behind stories that refuse to be forgotten. Richard Boone was never the kind to ride off into the sunset. His journey was one of triumph and struggle, of genius and defiance. He played heroes, villains, and men who lived in the gray between, always bringing something deeper, something real. From the calculated poise of Paladin to the raw intensity of his film roles, Boone's presence never wavered. He challenged Hollywood, fought for his art, and when the industry no longer fit him, he walked away. He lived and worked on his own terms, never compromising, never settling. His story wasn't a perfect one. It was rough, flawed, and uncompromising. But legends aren't meant to be perfect. They're meant to be remembered. And Richard Boone, television's greatest gunslinger, will never be forgotten.